All team, give it everything you got.
It's time to fangirl flail with Fangirls Going Rogue.
Count me in.
Never get between a Mandalorian and a weapons package.
This is the way.
News, discussion, and commentary from the female point of view.
You call this a diplomatic solution?
No, I call it aggressive negotiations.
She's as important as he is.
With your hosts, Trisha Barr and Sarah Woloski.
Boy, am I glad to hear your voice.
Strap in, because this is where the fun begins.
I like the sound of that.
Welcome, Yub Cubs, to Fangirls Going Rogue. I am Sarah Woloski from Skywalking Through Neverland, and today we are truly going rogue. But first, before I explain that, I want to welcome my co-host, Trisha Barr from Fangirl Blog. Welcome, Trisha. How has your week been? What have you been watching this week?
I've been watching, there's a lot of things to watch. We have Marvel's Secret Invasion. We have Strange New Worlds. I have not at this point seen Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny.
Okay.
There were many things to do on this holiday weekend. It is July 3rd as we record this. But I feel like I need to say ad astra for this episode. Going to stars of many different types.
Yes. So we're truly going rogue a little bit, and we are not, well, we are going to talk Star Wars, but as it relates to the other franchise, Star Trek. Because you and I, we've been fans of Star Trek a long time as well.
I know. I would say Star Wars is our primary fandom that has really kind of got us inspired to do stuff. And for a lot of that, particularly when we were podcasting, Star Wars really was dominating the pop culture. So it was fun when Bill Beachler challenged us to do an episode on Star Trek and Star Wars, because I think there's a lot of things that make the two franchises really kind of tie together that can make you be a fan of one or the other. And there are ways that they're different that make them both unique and special. So we're, as fans of both, it's fun to talk about them both.
Yeah, so we're taking his challenge on. So I think before we get started, I mean, we've talked ad nauseum about where our Star Wars fandom began, but I think we need to go into how our Star Trek fandom began. Oh, were you a fan of Star Trek before Star Wars, Trisha?
Well, it's probably all around the same time, because I was born in 1969. And I saw the original Star Wars in the movie theaters, and the original series was playing would have been reruns at that point. But that was a lot of our TV too, was, things that were being rerun. And at some point there in, the 8, 9, 10-year-old range, at some point I started watching the original series and became aware of it. And as you moved into the late 80s, Star Wars and Star Trek both became film franchises, and they kind of built off each other. Star Wars in 1977 gave Star Trek sort of permission to go into the film business. And then the Next Generation, that was sort of in college years, and I was a fan. I just didn't get to do it, watch it all the time like I wanted to. But at some point I was catching up on all of that. And I've always, if Star Trek's coming out, I generally get to it. It's not always the priority, but in the last few years, I felt like they've been really strong and have really captivated me again. So I would say, people say, are you an original series fan, or are you a Next Generation fan? Next Generation fan is more where I sit down, and where I think that's where I really started getting interested, because I could understand what the stories were telling, as opposed to the original series. It's much later that I got to those. I'm like, they're really saying a lot of important things.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, for me, my Star Trek fandom began, I would say, a little bit after Star Wars. So Star Wars I got into in middle school. I was in the band, so the music was a big part of that. But in high school, I had so much homework. I was on all that IB AP track and just lots of homework, but at night I would need some chill time before going to bed. And I was talking to my mom when she was here last month. I was like, when did we start watching Star Trek together? Because we started it. We would need some chill time before bed. My dad would be upstairs doing his own thing. He's kind of an introvert, so he just stayed in his office for a while. And so my mom and I found The Next Generation, and it would be on every night at 9 or 10 p.m. and we'd watch it together. And between Captain Picard and Data, who both reminded Mama me of my dad because he's very analytical. He's an engineer. He's like, so Data was our dad or my dad. So that's how we fell in love with The Next Generation. And I really loved that. And then the movies were coming out at that point. So I watched all the movies. First Contact was my favorite. What's interesting is I never, ever watched the original series. My parents weren't fans. Yeah, I've never seen the original series. So we started trying to watch Voyager, but we couldn't get into it. I don't know. We didn't really give it a chance. I kind of feel bad about that. Because I don't know. It's something Captain Picard is like so great, right? Like it's hard to accept another captain after him. So, but as I grew older, I was able to expand my mind, and I eventually have seen all of the Star Trek series except the original series all the way through. I loved Star Trek 2009, that film by J.J. Abrams. Of course, it had Chris Pine in it.
Yes.
Yeah. So I was already going to see it anyway. And then, it kind of went dormant, my Star Trek fandom, for a while until 2019, when Richard and I were at San Diego Comic-Con surrounding area. We didn't go to the Comic-Con. We just went to all the different things around it. One of them was this Star Trek Picard pop-up museum. And that had like all these elements from TNG that I remembered, and it like rekindled my fandom, including this big portrait of Captain Picard, which I took a picture with. I was like, oh, it's my captain. So yeah, ever since, Paramount Plus has now these amazing Star Trek series, which, as you've mentioned, they've been really strong and have really just, I've become as big of a Star Trek fan as Star Wars at this point.
Yeah, particularly the recent stuff has really, Star Trek has always wanted to talk about like a utopia and equality and diversity, but even at the beginning, it was still led by 3 white male characters. But now you're seeing things like Discovery with a Black female lead, and her story about rising. Michelle Yeoh is in that series as well. And you're just seeing there's diverse storytellers that are telling the story, and they've kind of taken it to a whole new level. Mm-hmm. I feel like really committed to telling a lot of different stories and types of stories and representing a lot of different type of people and the realities. There's always this great way how they work in, no matter what they're doing, using aliens or whatever that episode of the week is, to represent, people who are othered and how we can like see each other, because that's the whole thing. If you're going out and meeting different cultures, meeting different societies, you have to find some common ground and understand them in order to, just speak to them, to deal with them, and to align as these like Federation of Planets. I love the aspirational tone that Gene Roddenberry picked up when he decided to make Star Trek.
I agree. I definitely agree with that. Now, Trisha, you had put out on social media a comment, please comment on Star Trek versus Star Wars, or ask us some questions. So do you want to go into what some comments are here?
Well, I was excited that Maggie Nowakowska responded, because I had done a You Talk We Listen episode with her, and she is like deep one of the early prime Star Wars fans, but she came from Star Trek fandom. So I'm just going to read a little bit about her thought. 1966 Star Trek fan here. This is Maggie talking. Star Trek was all the sci-fi books I read as a kid and in high school brought to the screen. I was entranced. I went to cons. I wrote fanfic. When Star Wars showed up, I was already in fandom, had found my people, and the transition from all Star Trek to Star Wars was easy, but there was and still is a difference between the two. I could find a place in the Star Wars universe that I couldn't in Star Trek. I'd have to wear a uniform to be part of Star Trek's universe. In Star Wars, I could have my own starship if I wanted to. I could see myself working and living there without having to salute. I like Star Trek. Without Trek, Star Wars was unlikely to exist as we know it, and that must be honored. But I love Star Wars. Star Trek became too much like the real world. It feels cramped to me these days and mundane. Star Wars remains a fantastic dream, drenched in philosophy and primal issues. I've grown old with Star Wars, and the universe still fits because it remains unlimited.
Huh. That's some great points there. Like, I don't know if I agree with it all, but I can definitely see her point. Like, I'm wondering how Star Trek feels cramped or mundane to her. I'm curious about that.
Yeah, and I would love to know if she's watching the new stuff, because
Yes.
but I can see in the way that you have to be part of the fleet,
Yes.
and there aren't these, and she's so big into, particularly I think if you're in the fanfic, you can make your own. That's Star Wars is the fanfic she's into now in the world, so she can kind of expand that in any way she wants to. And she, especially if like Star Trek was the first one, you'd feel like, well, I have to be part of like the ship and go places, because I understand it for sure. But I love how she just compares the two, having been there from the beginning.
Yeah, that's definitely a perspective we don't have necessarily.
For sure. So she's all the way back from the original series, but I thought kind of just to place us in this conversation, we might mention what our favorites are, and that can be from film, animation, or TV in the Star Trek universe.
Okay. I mean, First Contact is my favorite film. I think it's an amazing film. The line must be drawn here. This far, no farther. Okay. Yes, I can't do Picard. But and The Next Generation will always be my nostalgic Star Trek, but I am really loving Strange New Worlds. I think it's a little too early to call it like my favorite, but yeah, so that's kind of where I am. Captain Picard will always be my favorite captain, but right now Captain Pike, who's from Strange New Worlds, is kind of giving him a run for his money. And then Star Trek 2009 with Chris Pine. I just have a thing for captains, okay? It's just a thing.
Well, obviously, 2009 Star Trek, they had a huge hurdle to overcome, and just, jumping past the existing lore, kind of setting the idea of, can you get past these three iconic characters? All of that, not even just the three, all of the cast, all of the cast is iconic for different people for different reasons. Members of the original series really speak to people.
Well, you're talking about particularly Captain Kirk, Spock,
and Scotty.
Scotty, right?
Yeah, for those three. And I thought that it just 2009 Star Trek it did it. Like it.
Yeah.
It's a little bit has that JJ goofball where he's not very good with like, countdown clocks, and sometimes he just throws physics to the wind. And as a Star Trek fan, I feel like that you need to be a little more careful with that kind of stuff, because it's not science fantasy, it's science fiction. So you sort of need to adhere to the rules of gravity and stuff like that. But in just the setting it up and saying, can you, as a thought project, put new characters into these iconic roles and have people gravitate toward them and still like love them, but still be true to the idea of who they were originally.
Like new actors, really right? Well. New actors.
Yeah, new actors.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I thought it worked amazingly. Yeah.
And at this point, I can't even say, well, we talk about that, like Matt Lanter, Hayden Christensen being Anakin. Yes. Depends on the day you ask me which one's my Anakin, if I'm watching the Clone Wars or if I have the prequels on or Kenobi. But the same thing, like I could say Shatner, I could say Chris Pine, it would work. Same with the Spocks. I mean, Spock is like an iconic character, and I can take any of the actors that have played it and go, yeah, I love their take. Paul Wesley coming into Strange New Worlds. I mean, a little intimidating, you'd think.
Yeah, he's doing Captain Kirk now. Right?
Yeah, I mean, crazy. So for me, the Next Generation, that's kind of where I am too. So we're kind of in the same vein. I loved Voyager for Janeway.
Yeah.
I just loved seeing a female captain. Wrath of Khan to me was a really compelling story, and it has kind of that same second movie energy of The Empire Strikes Back to me. I loved the absolute ridiculous goofiness of Voyage Home, the fourth film.
The whales.
I mean,
the whale movie.
The whales. It is such an absolute just ridiculous movie, but I love it. I don't know why.
Maybe you must have seen it at the right time. Like, that's a lot of movies sometimes when you see
it is a lot of movie. It is, and it's very, the era it is in is, I think if you were in that era, it's going to totally speak to you. And maybe if you're looking at it from outside the era, you might be like, wow, really, Trisha? And season 3 of Picard, one of my top favorite things I've ever seen done in storytelling. And I look forward to Strange New Worlds, and it really hasn't disappointed me. Every time I feel like it raises the bar. So I saw Ethan Peck did the Ready Room, and he described it as like lightning in a bottle, their cast. Yeah. And I think that's probably right. There's just such good energy, and they have fun, and they're just been willing to do that episodic, commit to a genre and do it.
Mm-hmm. You have one more note on here, which I agree with, so I'll say it. But Star Trek Discovery really committed to inclusion with women, female captains, female first officers, and I think it was season 3 where they had a female villain, the green character. Yes. And I thought that season in particular was incredible. And I was like crying at the end because I was like, oh, the women are amazing.
Well, and they were really doing all the things that we've talked about over the years, where you're challenging tropes.
Yes.
Telling stories. They're still very truthful to like how a Black woman may feel, but it's not about her being a Black woman in a society that doesn't accept her. It's other obstacles in her story that recreate a very similar dynamic for Burnham. And then even just, there's the idea of motherhood in there and mentorship with Michelle Yeoh's character. There's just all these different ways that it really kind of packages all the things you want and makes them really accessible in a storytelling venture. And they were launching then, trying to, everybody's trying to get their streaming services going. So I think that was really brave what they did.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
For sure. And then Teresa, our good old Teresa friend, co-founder of Fangirls Going Rogue, she asked where to start, and which is related to also something that David Mandeville brought up. He said, I started as a Trek fan back in the early 70s, but at that time there was no Star Wars. Then Star Wars took over, and it's been part of my life ever since. Now too, however, I'm watching the new Trek shows and loving them, proving myself there's room for both. What's the best way to express this to others who may be in the same situation? Is it, hey, if I did it, you can too?
So are we asking, like, where should someone who maybe wants to jump into Star Trek start? Is that what we're asking?
And also, if you have friends, who are Star Wars fans, what do you say to say, hey, you should try this too?
Okay. Well, why don't you go first, Trisha? That's a loaded question.
I actually think this Strange New World is a perfect place to start. It's before the original series, so it's leading up to it. They're designed it to be episode of the week, and you don't really need to know everything. If you do know things, they're leaving nuggets for you. But what they're giving you, you could go on and just simply learn those characters and learn about different things that are going on, events that are going on in the Star Trek universe. But just as far as the basic principles of, the Federation and all those ideas, I think Strange New Worlds is a really great place to start. But I don't think there's a wrong place to start either.
No. And also Strange New Worlds is fun. So if you want to have fun, like because a lot of like the Next Generation is very thoughtful. A lot of those
Yes.
episodes are thoughtful, makes you think, makes you ponder, makes you question your life and yourself, which not everyone is looking for that all the time. But if if you are in a dramatic mood, then the Next Generation, I would recommend like a curated list of really great Next Generation episodes, maybe ones that feature Q or the Borg are really fun places to start. You could even do like I think there's 2 Borg episodes, and then that leads into the movie First Contact a little bit, and then you learn about Picard's like family and past with the episode of Family, which I think somewhere in there too. So it's some really good curated Next Generation episodes are good to watch as well.
I think too, you could try, if you just want to try, you could try the films. Like you're not going to get kind of the in-depth thing, but just, any of the movies starting at the beginning of, because there's Next Generation movies. There's obviously the 2009, I don't know, past the 2009 one. I don't know that I'd go
right.
keep going past that one. But if you wanted to learn more about Kirk and Spock and all that from the original series, you could go to those movies as well. I still think that Wrath of Khan is it's such a foundational movie across the board for people that it's a good one to see, but it would help if you saw the first one before it to kind of learn. And I dare anybody to watch Voyage Home and not love it. Come on.
Yeah. I mean, how can you not love whales? I mean, if you love space whales, you're going to love The Voyage Home.
I mean, my favorite part is just the ridiculousness of them putting the whales inside the ship. And they do a really good job of capturing San Francisco, like at that time.
Yes. So. Yes. Oh, and it's fun. Also random. This is random, but Star Trek Picard, I believe it was was it season 1 or season 2 where he goes, and anyone who's been to Star Wars Celebration in Anaheim will recognize that I think Starfleet in San Francisco is the Anaheim Convention Center, which is really cool.
Yeah, they don't shy away from just using things and sort of, changing up a little bit. I mean, talk about they're doing science fiction back in the day, particularly with a really low budget. So, and even if you ask somebody, what are the best original series episodes, you can watch just a handful of them, like the time travel episode or whatever, because they are kind of localized in their story, which is what Strange New Worlds is trying to reproduce. And you could watch them and the story still works. Like it still works today. They're timeless, and it doesn't really matter how big the special, I mean, there's goofy special effects them, and the story's captivating you and you don't go, oh, they're really goofy.
Yes.
So
one of my favorite things is in the original series that there's that famous episode where Kirk has a fist fight with a Gorn. And the Gorn is supposed to be this terrible creature that's, oh my gosh, evil. They get to like a planet, right? And there's this creature who's hiding among the rocks. It's the Gorn. And it's this lizard creature. And it's obviously a guy in a suit with a mask. And he's like taking punches like at 4 times slower than the normal speed because he just can't see. And they're like having this slow motion fight, but not in slow motion. It's like the most ridiculous thing you've ever seen. And then Strange New Worlds is like, the Gorn, huh? Let's see. And they alienize the Gorn. Like they basically have an episode of Strange New Worlds that's Alien, the movie, but making the Gorn the alien. And it's awesome. I think it's
they're scary as hell.
They're scary. Yeah.
Yeah. Like
they're alien scary.
Like you don't survive alien scary for sure.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that they're going to be a bit of an adversary again in this season.
Yes.
That's been implied. So Strange New World is in its 2nd season now. Season 1 introduced viewers to the Starship Enterprise before the iconic original series, with Captain Pike leading the ship with number 1 Una Chin Riley and Spock as the science officer. This team appears in Discovery first, where Pike sees a vision of his future. In Strange New Worlds, he is coming to terms with that horrific inevitability. Season 2 2 opens with 3 episodes that focus on critical members of his team. In the Broken Circle, Spock steals the Enterprise to help a former crew member and to avert an intergalactic war, faces a horrible choice. In Ad Astra per Aspera, Una is court-martialed for hiding the fact that she's a Lyrian, whose genetic modifications are outlawed in the Federation. And in Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, Security Officer Laan Noonien Singh meets an alternative universe Captain Kirk. They join forces to prevent devastation to the Federation's future. None of these episodes deal directly with Pike's conflict, but let's discuss them.
Okay. Woo. All right. I found it interesting that, Captain Pike is leading Strange New Worlds, and yet in these first 3 episodes, really, he's not featured as much, really. And so the first episode, we have Spock is leading the ship. He basically steals the Enterprise. And Ethan Peck is the actor who plays Spock. And wow, he does such a great job with Spock, I think.
Have you watched The Ready Room with him that
Yes.
came after that episode?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's such a smart, intelligent guy.
Yes.
Like, he understands where he has Spock at this point. So he's moving towards a Spock we know in the original series, who's very kind of
stoic.
Almost like Data, almost,
Yes.
where you question, like, he's trying to find his humanity. But here he's more like a younger man struggling with this duality of being Vulcan, of being human, of experiencing emotions in a world where he hasn't had anybody really tell him how to deal with them. He's been living on Vulcan, and he's there with Nurse Chapel in the first season, where she kind of sees him and understands and kind of gives voice. Like, she's the voice that says, this is what you're experiencing. It's okay. Like, it's normal, because no one's told him that.
Right, because she's a human, and she can kind of let him know, yeah, it's fine to experience emotion. Like, it's okay. Yeah, I always love that about Star Trek, how there is that character that's like the one that questions humanity, which helps you in turn figure out how to be the best human you can be, right? By that one character, like Data or
Absolutely.
Scott. Yeah.
There's all these different characters that come in that 7 of 9
Yes.
was that character as well, like dealing with,
she was
these identity crises.
She was made a Borg, but then was like severed from the Borg and brought back to be a human. And yet she found herself like, I miss the voices in my head. Like she couldn't figure out how to be back as a human, and
they took that journey all the way through Picard,
just
like they took that journey all the way through with Data, bringing him back all the way through the end of the Picard series to kind of deal with these things. I'm just going to say, here's my Star Wars comment, is that Ethan Peck could play one heck of a Jagged Fell. He doesn't even have to dye that white strip in his hair, because naturally he does have a white streak in his black hair.
Okay, remind me, who is Jagged Fell?
Jaina Solo's boyfriend, fiance, eventually husband in the Star Wars Expanded Universe. Also portrayed as a very kind of stoic guy who occasionally lets his hair down, but more, he acts more Chiss. Same idea too. He was brought, lives with one people and kind of has learned from them and has to discover his humanity when he comes back to leaves the Chiss region and comes back to live with humans. So it's a very similar story. But
wow.
I feel like if they were going to do Jagged Fell in Star Wars, that Ethan Peck could wrestle the character.
Yeah.
And he has the right looks for it. But
well, I do want to mention, and I didn't know this until you sent me an article about Ethan Peck talking about Star Trek, but he is the grandson of Gregory Peck. Like, holy cow.
Yeah.
And now that you say that, I see it. But before that, all I saw was Spock.
When you see him not in the Spock outfit,
right.
He looks so different. Mm-hmm. It's such a, it's the eyebrows and the bangs and the sideburns and all
jawline,
that kind of
I would say.
Put it together and make this Spock character. But for him, it's incredible what I'd call like face acting and particularly eye acting that make it all work, because there's that scene in that first episode where he steals a ship and he has his little captain line,
Yes.
which was done so well because they go from crew member to crew member.
You gonna say your thing? Everyone in the chair has their thing.
I would like the ship to go. Now.
It's all in how he raises the eyebrow and is just so, I mean, everything is serious. He knows that they're making fun of him, but everything in him is just serious in the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Each captain in Star Trek has their thing.
Are you a Nurse Chapel and Spock shipper? Do you want it to happen? I think you like the fiance too.
I do. Okay. So I'm torn. I'm very torn. I feel like they did a good job in making you very torn because there's a particular episode in season 1, which is my favorite. It's called Spock Amok, in which Spock and his fiancée T'Pring basically do a body swap. It's a Freaky Friday in space, and they have to beat each other. You just have to see it. But it's hilarious and I love it so much. So, and I think their relationship is so sweet and cute and very, very serious,
Mm-hmm.
Like every time they see each other, they have this phrase that they repeat to each other, and it's this chant.
Spock, parted from me and never parted, never and always touching and touched. We meet at the appointed place.
T'Pring, parted from me and never parted. Never and always touching and touched. I weigh you.
But Nurse Chapel is with Spock all the time and is able to, see the humanity in him. And so it's almost like Spock not only has to deal with the fact that he is both human and Vulcan, but now he's got a human on one shoulder and a Vulcan on the other. And It's like this fantastic love triangle. So, I'm shipping the love triangle because I love that kind of conflict. That's what I'm shipping.
I love how you describe it, that angel and devil, and not in that way. It's just, choosing oneself over choosing another self, but being able to identify them. And maybe really it's just about understanding all of yourself that helps you deal with the conflict that the two halves could bring together. So ultimately, I think we're rooting for Spock. I do love that Nurse Chapel was sort of a background character, and she gets a lot more in the show to do that makes her really well-rounded. And I loved in The Broken Circle just the whole idea of that enhancement thing with Mbenga and her taking that serum and being able to do this amazing fighting, and just the way they explored war too, with that storyline where they were separate and having to do what they're doing, and you realizing that he's done this before and experienced before. I just thought it was really well done in that episode, and I like that they're exploring more of the wars in Star Trek.
Okay, cool. I still don't understand how they fought the Klingons. How do they fight Klingons and not break their arms? I just don't understand.
Well, whatever that serum does, it's like they're hulking out for some bit of time. And the implication to me is they don't really explain it, but I feel like Mbenga has done it enough times that he knows how to keep going and doing it. And Nurse Chapel's having trouble keeping up the fight.
Okay.
Less experience probably. And she starts losing it first, like the superpower, so to speak. Okay. And he keeps fighting, and she kind of, it's probably some type of adrenaline thing. It's probably something that's not legal anymore.
Right.
From the war time. And yeah, so it was interesting to see him talk about just the way he talked about war. And,
that's
they could any story that's dealing with war could do more to talk about the realities of what happens to the people after it, as opposed to glorifying the fighting. And I think that's what they were trying to do with that episode.
That makes sense.
What do you think of Pelia, our new chief engineer, Carol Kane?
Carol Kane. Oh my God. Carol Kane in Star Trek. Who would have thunk, right? I think it's hilarious. I think it's a fun addition. Because in season 1 we lost the engineer that we had. And so in season 2, we need this new one. But I love the idea that she is this being, a Tanzanite or something that has been around for thousands of years. She's that's a cool perspective, and this is a new kind of alien that they've introduced to Star Trek.
Yeah, and not only that, in the 3rd episode, La'an assumes that she's this amazing engineer and has always been an amazing engineer. And she goes, they're back in time. She goes and finds her. And she's not an engineer. She's just a shopkeeper and doesn't even know anything about engineering. But at some point, just that idea, that meeting gives her the inspiration to go and learn engineering, become an amazing engineer that she's teaching at Starfleet Academy. So I just love the idea that as a 1,000-year-old being, you can still improve yourself and become something different. So,
and her perspective on, I'm bored, I'll steal the ship with you. Like there's, her life has different consequences than other people, because she just sees it in such a different perspective.
Well, we also know that she was a thief when La'an meets her. So, like, stealing something, she's like, yeah, let's scratch that itch. I haven't done that in a while.
Exactly. That's so cool.
So I kind of love that. And it's very, did you watch the Disney Gallery Mandalorian season 3?
Yes.
When Jack Black was like, Bombardier. I love that whole part when he's just like riffing in the costume. Ladies are just like, I'm doing her job. And he's like saying, they're saying that he wrote, Favreau wrote it for me. And Favreau does that. We know that he writes with people in mind. And I feel like she said they came to her and I think they were just like, wild thing, we're going to put Carol Kane as our fan casting. And then they asked her and she said yes, essentially.
Yeah. Excellent. I'm sure Carol Kane was like, Star Trek, I haven't done that before. She's kind of has the same attitude as Pelia, her character.
Well, and it's great too to see these actors and actresses who would think, well, maybe they should be done, and they're not. So she is definitely holding her own.
Yes.
With these whippersnappers, for sure. Ad Astra is the classic humanity on trial episode that Star Trek is known for. And I have to say I cried almost the whole episode. I was a wreck. It is, to me, a beautiful story.
I would agree with you. I think this is going to stand up as one of those episodes of Star Trek that you will rewatch again and again, or go back to it. You, like you said, it's classic. It's this classic trial episode. They did this a lot in The Next Generation, which I think is why we are particularly drawn to it, because they would find ways for Captain Picard to say one side of an argument, right? And even against Riker, his first officer, they would have these trial episodes. So in this one, they had Captain Pike recruit an Illyrian, who is a black woman, to state the case for Una, who is Pike's first officer, but she is an Illyrian and she has been genetically modified, which is not allowed in the Federation. And so she has, gone climbed up the ranks of the Federation without declaring herself as an Illyrian, a genetically modified being. And so she's on trial for this. But what it really amounts to, and what Star Trek does so well, is this could be any part of society that has been like downtrodden upon, like Jim Crow laws. Think of those laws back, for slavery, things like that. Like slavery was once legal. It's the same kind of thing. And even in this episode, that is brought up. The fact that gay marriage has been illegal, right? And now it's legal. So it's just this whole episode about something fundamental in our society that we can relate to, even though it's a particular thing that's happening in this episode. So I just love that. I definitely cried as well. It was the last episode that was played during Pride Month, and so that too was on my mind. And wow, I thought it was fantastic.
It was great too, because we got to see the personal story between Una and her lawyer, how that affected the story as well. Una she didn't really have a choice. Her parents had done this genetic modification to her.
Yes.
It was a thing she was. And then, but she was able to pass
Right.
as not modified, and the lawyer wasn't. And her family chose, when there was this rift and the Illyrians were separated, to just pass. And that allowed her to apply to Starfleet even. And the question is, you lied on your application, and ultimately the lawyer finds the way in the law, within the law itself, to fix the injustice of the situation, which is, Una believes in the Federation, and she believes in their quest and believes that everybody to try to achieve to be better people, and she's furthered their mission, and that she's essentially asked for asylum. She turned herself in.
Mm-hmm.
And that there's a lot there where she's, that's a challenging thing. I like that the lawyer figured it out, that she had turned herself in.
I also love the fact that there wasn't a complete happy ending, because often in life there isn't a happy ending. Things aren't fair, right? And so I like the fact that, yes, Una was let off on basically a technicality, but the whole of Illyrians the law was not changed for other Illyrians, and yes, now maybe this will lead them to question more, but we probably won't see that in these Star Trek episodes. So I like that it reflected life that way.
For sure. Just a classic. You could watch it, you could start at Strange New Worlds, just watch the first 2 episodes, and you would just the writing, the acting, the way it was done, is so well done. And I watched that behind the scenes, and I was reminded that Star Trek also uses a volume. We see a lot in The Mandalorian, the volume. They use one too.
Yeah.
So, to see how they used that wall to make different elements that they're working on is really kind of cool.
I agree.
So we haven't talked since you've seen Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow.
Yes.
What did you think?
This is the classic time travel story. So La'an, I've always liked La'an. She's a little standoffish. That's another reason I like that Spock Amok episode, because La'an and Una have this cute storyline where they're like basically the unfriendly Star Trek people, or the ones they're the workaholics, which I can relate to. Richard's a workaholic. And so they're the workaholics, but they find a way to have fun in that episode. And so I feel like in this one, we explore just La'an herself and how she's always closed off because she has this relation to Khan, who again is he genetically modified, or he started the whole war?
Yeah, he's genetically modified, and he started the war.
Yeah.
Did
he start World War III?
Well, he's essentially a dictator who slaughtered people. So he rose to power, and in a way he uses modifications, his advanced intelligence and strength and that kind of stuff, to set himself up to be this ruler and dictator and, committer of genocide, whatnot. He was not a good person, but the idea is that what became of Earth afterwards, they came out of it like a crucible as a better society, having experienced what he did.
Right. And that's explored in this episode of time travel. So I thought it was beautiful. There was a love story in it because La'an meets this alternate universe Captain Kirk, and they basically have a while you were sleeping bunch of moments in the city of Toronto. They're walking around in the cold. I was reminded of While You Were Sleeping a lot. And having hot dogs, right? On the riverfront and stuff. But yeah, and La'an finally lets someone in, and it's tragic. Oh.
It is tragic.
It's so sad.
It's very tragic. Now we know why in the trailer, when Kirk beams on board this universe, Kirk beams on board, that they note that she looks a little flustered at him showing up. So she must still be having feelings. But that was definitely that moment when she broke down and cried at the end, because she's,
Yes.
you know, just such a kind of calm character who gets stuff done. We know that there's a lot of tragedy in her life, and she's still, you know, and then she has to tackle this thing of like letting go of this identity of being, you know, the reason this Kirk, I think, appeals to her, the alternate timeline Kirk, is because he doesn't know who she is. And that's, everybody knows when she says her name, who she is. And so this is the first time she's met somebody who doesn't have any perception about her from the name itself. And I loved that she got to kind of explore that. And then ultimately the question is very similar to the question Pike's facing, is like, you're looking at a future possibility and you have to accept it, right?
Yeah.
She has to accept that at this moment in time, he's a child, and accept that where I end up and everything that happens in between, you know, that's, you know,
it's
the good of the many versus the good of the few is a very Star Trek idea to explore. And just like in Star Wars, we have selflessness and selfishness.
Mm-hmm.
No, yeah, I loved it. I loved just the romance. Give me all of it.
Yes.
And Star Trek's never shied away from that. Christina Chong, who plays La'an, was up for the role of Rey.
Wow.
In The Force Awakens.
I can see that now.
Yeah.
Wow. And she's excellent. I just want to know who does her makeup, because someone different does her makeup than does any of the cast, because she's like glowing.
Very glowy.
Yeah,
yes.
very glowy. And she has this tight line under eyeliner, even when she's sleeping, which I'm like, interesting.
I love that they're, so I know some people said, oh man, how did they afford that hotel room with just the money? And I'm like, you know what? But they were just going with the romance trope. Like, it's just like a conceit of the genre that you're just going to have this amazing room. And so they're playing with the genre, and that's just part of it. So I only noticed men questioning that conceit in that episode. Anybody else is like, yeah, they're supposed to have an amazing hotel room so that she can look longingly across at him sleeping on the couch.
And he can be awake and notice her. Oh, nice.
Scott Hume brought up, he said in the Facebook discussion group, I have been a Trek fan almost as long as Star Wars, so I've never understood the supposed rivalry between the two fan bases. They are very different properties that have different things to say, and both are wonderful in their own way. Other than being two-word sci-fi franchises that start with star, what do you think is the reason for the rivalry? And what are your thoughts on the supposed rivalry between the franchises and their fans?
Okay. I feel like back in like the 80s and 90s, when everyone put things in boxes, you were a nerd, you were a jock, you were a, you know, like Grease, right? Grease has all the different tropes. And that continued, I would say, through the 90s, and then in the 2000s just kind of scattered, right? So I feel like that kind of thinking, that putting things in boxes, you are this, you are that, putting labels on things, really promoted that whole Star Trek versus Star Wars. Because you have, I think we had mentioned sci-fi versus science fantasy, right? It's like very different. That is part of where that rivalry was in people's heads, if not in their mouths, or, you know, like actual people who loved those franchises maybe didn't have that in their heads, but that's where it began.
I see in your notes you mentioned prequels fans versus sequel fans versus original trilogy fans. People want to kind of like pit things together, and you know, it's okay to say, oh, I like the original trilogy better. It makes sense. It's where I came from. Right. That's where I came from. And it's going to be hard for anything to live up to it, because the older you get, the more cynical you get, the more you want something to be a certain way. That's why even in Star Trek, you have people who are like the original series fans, or the, you know, Next Generation fans, or the Deep Space Nine fans, or however that works. Right. Mm-hmm. But really, I think those struggles come when people identify too much with a particular show or story or character. And then when somebody says, I like the other franchise, then they take that as you saying, well, I don't like you because you love Star Trek. And that's where we have to be able to disconnect, right? It's learning to not to say they have an opinion, and their opinion about a story doesn't reflect on me.
Or define who I am, or define who they are. Exactly. Yeah.
You know, having been a fan for a long time, it's you recognize it. Sometimes you'll say I like something and people will start to blow up, and I'm like, but that doesn't I'm not saying anything about you. It's just saying what I feel. And it's curious now too, that with the internet and everything, you can start to realize, because a lot of times the media impression is that Star Trek has to be pitted against Star Wars. I can't remember who it was. I want to say it was Mark Newbold.
Oh.
He was telling me he went on TV, and the media set him up for like, well, is Star Wars or Star Trek better? Like, so, and then he's like, neither, like you can like both type of thing. So sometimes that's the narrative that people want to put out there. So you see it in like print or on news that they want to pit something together. I think even when you guys did you and Richard did the news show.
Yeah.
Didn't they ask you like what's wasn't that like something like the prequel?
Yes.
It was like they were trying to set it up.
Yes. Yeah. Like, oh, well, which trilogy are you a fan of? Kind of a thing. Yeah.
And I felt like Richard did a really good job of like deflecting that. But I was like, that's kind of where they wanted to go with it.
Yeah.
And I've done enough different media, different times, you know, doing book tours and stuff where they always kind of want to bring that up. And you're like,
well, I think there's even a standing panel, I want to say at San Diego Comic-Con, that's like kind of a Star Wars versus Star Trek. And each year they do like the weapons or the whatever, or the, you know, like it's Star Wars versus Star Trek something.
But and when they do that though, it's all in sort of good fun.
Yes, it's in good fun
when they do it.
Yeah.
And I like that they take that approach, like, let's talk about this, or this is better, but then you can like have this like, but we're all friends at the end, which is how you should be able to debate things. I think you should be able to have I like this and this is really cool, but you know, at the end of the discussion, you're all good.
I agree.
You don't have to disagree
or
agree. You just do whatever you want to do.
Yes.
We should talk a little bit about how these franchises kind of cross-pollinate and how they've worked together, that there is a symbiosis, that these things happened for a reason. And I found this fun article on StarTrek.com, and I'll just read from it. The documentary Trek Nation features an interview with George Lucas in which the director revealed that he was a fan of Star Trek, used to attend conventions, and admired Gene Roddenberry's ability to create so much despite limitations of budget, time, and technology. Roddenberry helped celebrate the 10th anniversary of Star Wars at an event run by Starlog Magazine and Creation Entertainment. The photo of Roddenberry and Lucas shaking hands at that event is pure fanboy, fangirl nirvana.
Richard was at that event and witnessed them meeting. Yeah. I think that's amazing. In fact, if you go to some of our Today in Star Wars History videos, I believe we have that in there.
I love that. I mean, and the point there is that Lucas was inspired by what Roddenberry did, and I feel like as we've gone forward, you've seen kind of this. J.J. Abrams really wanted to make Star Wars, and he got offered Star Trek.
Yeah.
So 2009 Star Trek is sort of that, and then that for him cascaded in the Star Wars. So there's kind of this all rolling of it. But if we look at these two franchises, they had two really distinct visionary minds that all this flowed from, who both of them ultimately were very personal stories. They wanted to look at bettering the world. Lucas went a different way. He was kind of trying to, for him, the original trilogy is a really personal story about what his father wanted him to do, and like stepping beyond what your father wants to do. But the prequel trilogies is really about what's going on in this world, right? What's happening with the politicians. And Star Trek is trying to say, here's a utopia kind of idea, the Federation, but they're still going to have struggles, and they're still going to have to try to spread this idea among the people across the galaxy to make a better place.
Yeah, I love that. I also found it interesting that Dan Madsen, who we know from Star Wars fandom, he was the originally he was part of the official Star Wars fan club. He was president of it, but before that, he was the founder of the official Star Trek fan club. And because he did such a good job with that, he was tapped by Lucas to be the president of the official Star Wars fan club. So it's always been cross-pollinating.
Yeah, and a lot of the early, as Maggie noted, a lot of the early Star Wars fans came from the people who were into Star Trek. And but remember, a lot of those people, most of their science fiction was coming from books. And George Lucas was very smart in putting out his books of his movies. I know these days we all talk about spoilers, but back in the day, everybody had read the book before they saw the movie. Mm-hmm. And if you were really hardcore. And so George Lucas kind of tapped into that fan base of people who wanted to read stories, and his was a space opera, but it was there's still a big kind of crossover of people who will read science fiction and fantasy itself.
And well, not only that, to promote Star Wars, they had the team, the publicity team, go to conventions, sci-fi conventions, WesterCon, the official, I don't know, there's a bunch of world conventions that they went to and promoted Star Wars along with Mark Hamill. Mark Hamill can be seen in that original like Star Wars t-shirt.
Well, I mean, and he's like, he would go to conventions.
Yeah.
Like Mark Hamill.
Yes.
Like when he would do San Diego Comic-Con stuff, and he'll talk about like walking around and, doing the thing. Like he was just really like a guy buying. And if he could, he would probably today just go around and buy stuff. So I also think it's really interesting that both of these franchises their original DNA is baked off this idea of the big three. Mm-hmm. Within their starting point is, Kirk, Spock, and Scotty, Dr. McCoy. And then for Star Wars, he had his big three. And I think that's in part because it works for characters. You need more than two characters to make that kind of storytelling work. So I love that. I love that there's kind of some basic DNA in both of the stories that work functionally.
Yeah. And you have to have that character like love. Like you have to be drawn to a particular character like that.
And even when The Mandalorian, just talking about story structure, when The Mandalorian came to TV, they went back to that episodic vibe of the original series. They, instead of like going to this long narrative, which we're used to in the Clone Wars, but the Clone Wars originally started out as an anthology, and then they realized they needed to make it a narrative to hold the audience, because the D Squad arc wasn't going to work. Like you needed to know that there was going to be something about Ahsoka coming up. So they did figure that out. They need to have a narrative. And at the end, the Clone Wars is a really strong narrative story, but the kind of episodic nature of just disjuncted these stories that aren't all tied together made The Mandalorian in the first season really accessible in the way that the original series is. And it's interesting that Strange New Worlds went back to that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and music, there's a lot of things that are similar about the music of Star Wars and Star Trek, at least the themes. So like both of the Star Trek theme and the Star Wars theme, they're completely iconic. They're both orchestral themes and done by... Well, I love the theme to The Next Generation. Jerry Goldsmith did that theme, and it's just incredible. It's like my favorite. And I will never, ever fast forward or skip the Next Generation, like credits. I love it. But also, one of the things they use is leitmotifs throughout. So I noticed that especially in watching the third season of Picard, upon the entrance of Worf, before you see him, you hear the Klingon theme, that da 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 da. I was like, oh, it's Worf, like it's just those little moments that remind me. And that, they do a similar thing in Star Wars. John Williams does that all the time to represent characters in Star Wars. So I think that's great. And it's just a little different. I actually think David Collins once did, you know how he analyzes particular themes in terms of where the notes go on the field and everything. Well, the Star Wars theme, well, it's like a very much a hit, like a hill with a climax to it, and it starts in one place, it goes up to the top, and then it goes back down to be back in that same place, but you've changed, right? But the Star Trek theme, it keeps on going up and up and up because it's very aspirational. It's looking to that brighter future. It's looking to the day when everything will be a utopia. And that's like how Star Trek is more aspirational. Star Wars is more that good versus evil, the hero's journey, I would say.
Right.
Yeah. And the music really sort of showcases that.
Both these franchises you can think about now that they have television in them. Both of them, you could think of these iconic through line storytellers. We have Jonathan Frakes, who's now, I think, directed like everything.
Yes.
And Dave Filoni, these people that sort of kind of know the core and the nuts and bolts of the visual, musical, character language that needs to exist in the franchise to just like make it easy and to bring other people along and teach them about it. So, those are really important for these like long franchises that exist over a lot of time.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And Jonathan Frakes is number one from the
Next Generation.
Thank you.
I'm getting to Picard.
Yes.
I know there's a lot of names of people to keep track of now that you have two franchises that you're talking about.
Yes.
And they both have a glue that holds their universe together. And in Star Trek, it's the Prime Directive, pretty much, or iterations of it when we were like earlier in time.
Even though they break it all the time.
They break it all the time. I know. Well, that's just like same thing. The Force is the glue that holds Star Wars together. And you're not always on the, you're trying to stay true to the light side, but there will always be reasons to stray or that will tug you astray. But it seems to be most of the time when they break the Prime Directive, it's for good reasons.
Yes. Yeah. To save a society or something like that. Yeah.
I thought we could talk a little bit about lessons that Star Wars could learn from Star Trek and vice versa, because as they grow they must evolve and change. Mm-hmm. Are there any things that like you thought of if you think of what could they learn from each other, or have they learned from each other?
This is so hard. I think this is a question we asked ourselves when we started thinking about doing this episode, right? And we both brought up this meme that has been going around of that, and I just burst out laughing when I saw it. So at the end of Star Trek Picard season 3, the last 2 episodes, you get the original cast coming together on the original bridge of the Enterprise, the iconic ship. And Star Wars, well, that was very reticent to do that for The Force Awakens. They were going to have like this progression in which Carrie Fisher was going to be the final, like, of the big 3 that was going to get her movie in episode 9. And of course, unfortunately, she passed away. And so there's this meme going around with all of the characters, Han Solo, Princess Leia, Mark Hamill, Luke, and Lando in the Falcon, the cockpit of the Falcon. What Star Wars fans wanted. Although, where's Chewie? Hello, people. Where's Chewie?
And R2 and 3PO.
Yeah, come on.
I felt like that it could have had a little bit more in that image, for sure.
So yes, what Star Wars fans wanted. And then they have all the Star Trek TNG people on the bridge of the Enterprise. What Star Trek fans got. And they got everyone walking around talking about the carpet, the walls. And it was such, oh my God, I don't think there was a dry eye of anyone who's a fan of the TNG watching that scene in Star Trek Picard.
Well, and two, the whole time I just kept expecting that someone was going to have to die,
Mhm.
and I was like, someone's going to die. I'm so prepared for it. I'm so prepared for it.
Yes.
Like I'm traumatized from Star Wars. Somebody has to die for this.
Yes.
You know, because they were just like boom, 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 dying off in the sequel trilogy. And this was like, no, we could bring the gang back together. They don't have to die. They have lost things and for themselves, but it sort of felt like, okay, but we're gonna set the story, you know, we're gonna close the book and you're gonna feel like it's done.
Yes.
And it's satisfying. Whereas I think the problem with the sequel trilogy for a lot of people is it just feels very unended. It's very much, they bought into the wars part and forgot that Star Wars was successful because it also too is an aspirational franchise. And I think that's what buys into its longevity. I mentioned it earlier. I do think Star Trek has embraced a little bit more of the wars in talking about storytelling. Discovery really goes into kind of the consequences of the battles you fight and the wars you're in, because we're seeing the Klingon war, you know,
and the Romulan a little bit,
Inception, that kind of stuff. But sometimes they, you know, I think Picard season 1 and 2 went a little too far where they were going to the choices you made, where Picard just is almost morose about the Borg stuff. And they finally do deal with it and resolve it. But it took them a little bit to find a way, and that's okay. You're not always going to balance everything. And it's about, you know, kind of weaving and wagging through the line to kind of hit the right tone for a franchise. So it's not an easy thing to do. So I think it's good for them to look at each other for lessons learned. So what happened with Star Trek Picard season 3, you know, is kind of like a light there for Star Wars to go, okay, maybe we should be a little more careful and precious with our characters when we're dealing with them.
Yeah. And I don't know if, so, you know, we've talked about how Han and Leia in The Force Awakens, their relationship was essentially dead. And that was a relationship that had brought many of us, including me, to the franchise. And I'm not sure if they quite got that right with Star Trek either. The Next Generation, like in season 3, we learned that Picard, well, his whole thing, Picard as the captain, is he's so into being the captain that he doesn't feel like he can have a relationship. He is married to his job. And so they explore that a little bit. They kind of say that he and Beverly Crusher, who they've always kind of had this chemistry going on in the TNG, but they have had a son together, which we never got to see, like any kind of, which I'm sad about, right? Like I would have loved to see, and they talk about how they had this fling on this island. It's like, well, but we want to see that. Like,
I want to see it.
Yeah.
Make the movie.
Yeah. Come on. We got this. We got the technology. We can make you younger. Let's do it. You know? So, I feel like, I don't know if that was done very well, but I do have to say that Riker and Troy, thank you. Riker and Troy, you know, they get together in The Next Generation, and now they're still married and have had their trials and tribulations, but they're still married. They're still with each other. And I feel like you need, like, not every relationship has to have trauma or be dramatic or something. Like, some people can, like, actually work and have a very nurturing relationship. And I love when they show those kind of relationships in media. Now, it's not perfect here in season 3, but I feel like actually in season 2, it was better. Like, they were.
Well, it was funny because in season 2 of Picard, they got the whole point where Picard finally got the lady, and then they're just like,
yes,
with her, and you know, back to this story because you have a son, and that part is never resolved. Because I was kind of like at the end of season 2, I'm like, okay, we went through this, and
now
Picard finally dealt with it, and he found somebody, you know, a lady friend, and then I get like why they were like, this is such a compelling story, and these are the steps we have to take
right
to do it. I mean, one of the challenges is Star Wars likes to talk a lot now about found family, but real family blood is a very simple storytelling shortcut to getting a lot of drama baked into a story. So found family is something that you have to work really hard. So the Next Generation got that found family vibe for the whole cast, for everybody over years. But real family, blood family is a very simple shortcut if you need to do something in storytelling to get to go, okay, now the stakes are here. Because if it had just been Beverly's son and not Picard's son,
right,
it wouldn't have worked.
No.
And so it
definitely wouldn't have worked because of the whole teens thing. But yes.
So I understand like why they did what they had to do. Ultimately, the one thing I really wish Star Wars would take away from Star Trek is, we talked about 2009 Star Trek. You can recast iconic characters and people will accept them, no problem. And Star Wars seems to think that Solo failed because of recasting.
No.
And it's not the case. That's not the case. Yeah. People are fine with that. If you think that recasting is a problem, you need to go back and look at everything else. And last thing would be recasting is a problem.
Yeah.
Anybody can play character. Like, not saying anybody could play Kirk, but I'm saying they're characters and not people. And we have to be very careful not to be precious about that, because that only limits your storytelling potential. I mean, we're looking at Vivian Lyra Blair, who's just done this amazing job being young Leia. And I hope they continue to explore ideas like that.
The very fact that Spock, who Leonard Nimoy made so iconic, has been recast now 2 times in fabulous ways with fabulous people. Like, I like Ethan Peck Spock more than Leonard Nimoy, but I mean, that's not hard for me because I'm not as attached to the original series. But I even liked the previous Spock from 2009. I'm forgetting his name now, but I thought he was a great casting as well. So yeah, that right there proves that point, I think.
I know we've talked about this. We talked about this in our Facebook groups a lot, is writers' rooms and their effect on storytelling. And you just if you go look at Star Trek and you look at who's working on it, they have these enormous writers' rooms. Wow. They're relying on a lot of different voices, as opposed to Jon Favreau writing all the episodes of The Mandalorian. And it always seems like that if there were just been one more voice in the room, like, they seem to be expanding, and I'm not going to blame Jon Favreau not necessarily for that. I feel like some of the kind of structure of how they're creating Star Wars right now and sort of the kind of franticness of it is creating this way that they can't do these trustful writers' rooms. I feel like they feel like they need to be really secretive and not necessarily everybody know what each other's doing because of the setup of Lucasfilm. And they need to find that way to create a body of trust across their storytelling universe that allows them to have these vast writers' rooms. I'm going to look at The Bad Batch as an example of them doing that and it working really well, and to create shows that, we see a lot of different voices, and then you could allow someone like a Jon Favreau, who I think is a really good idea guy, and a Dave Filoni, who's a really good idea guy, directing people like George Lucas did in the Clone Wars to get some really good storytelling.
Yeah, I can see that. I think the only other thing is that Star Wars could learn from Star Trek, or both. Well, it's like a difference, because like Star Trek is set in this society where you don't need money, where everyone aspires to be the best that they can be doing work, whereas Star Wars, how it really brings people, so that brings certain people in, right? It's like you're aspirational, you want to be a part of that society, whereas Star Wars starts from a place where you have this lived in world. It's dirty, it's got bounty hunters, it's got like the dregs of society, yet everyone is here, yet the Force is kind of like what you aspire to, or it's like, you have this good versus evil going on. So I just find the settings are so different to tell similar stories, And
Well, I'm gonna make a storytelling point on
okay,
that.
yeah.
So if you look at a society as a cycle, right? The
Okay.
Roman Empire rose and then
Ah.
it had its problems, got too big and fell. And you would say, as we look at Star Trek expand, they've gone more into the areas of decline and like
Yes.
where things happen, and we're starting to kind of go into those dirty lived in worlds where things weren't as great. And if you look at Star Wars as they're starting the fight in the original trilogy to kind of rise out and move towards utopia, Star Wars never embraced the rise up. So you have to kind of, they started, the original trilogy starts to climb, and the sequel trilogy, the expectation was a lot of people thought we were going to go to like Heir to the Empire, where you were going to see the government collapse, or, you know, the collapse reform into something better and new. It might not going to be perfect, but you kind of have to embrace that rise up. And that's one of the reasons the books particularly didn't want to do another kind of fall of the society from internally, the fall of the New Republic after Rose was from an outside, you know, attack.
Right.
And they didn't want to show something that had been fought for they're losing it because
to
of
implode.
Force.
They didn't want the good forces to implode.
Right. So Star Trek is sort of embracing that the other side of the cycle, which is a natural cycle of a society. And Star Trek never embraced, in the sequel trilogy, rising up to that aspirational level. You can go back and like kind of round it out and fill it out. But as an aspirational franchise, it should have gone towards that and then allowed the conflict to kind of bend back down around it and see the struggles. And that's sort of where the High Republic was trying to kind of go. It's so weird because the High Republic is there's all these ways they're trying to fix the things that they should have done, like in the first place. So the High Republic is sort of like, we should have done that. Now they're talking about doing the Rey movie. Oh, we're going to see her rebuild the Order. That's what people wanted to see Luke do.
Right.
They wanted to see Leia build the government. They wanted to see Han become this general that he sort of grew into in the original trilogy. So, you know, Star Wars has sort of kind of struggled where it didn't just accept the growth that the potential that George put it on in an aspirational way. And because it still isn't aspirational story.
Right.
Prequel trilogy doesn't exist without the original trilogy. So you have to look at it from there. So you have to, after you've gone down, you still have to rise back up. You know, it would have been cool. Like all these things they haven't done in Star Wars, a family that's trying to figure out how to do these things, try to be part of a Jedi Order. How do you be a Jedi family? All these questions that they haven't done. And they kind of jumped away from all sorts of new storytelling. Whereas like Picard season 3 is like, let's just get down and dirty. What happens with all these families? You know, we got Geordi's family, we got Riker's family, we got Picard realizing he has a family. So it's just like, they're just like, so it's not just not just about seeing the bodies in the room and that meme. It's about seeing the families struggle and deal with everything that's happened to them.
Nice. Way to round it out, Trisha. I love it.
Yeah.
Nice. Oh, well, is there anything we want to add?
If you aren't watching Star Trek, check it out. Strange New Worlds is a good place. Or go, there's plenty of curated lists around of, just episodes you can watch.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and you have any questions, you can ask either one of us. We can direct you
go
to
in that Facebook group, make recommendations. I was excited to see people kind of jump in. Like, there are a lot more Star Wars, Star Trek fans like that are both. Right?
Yes, I agree.
Then the media would let you believe. It's okay to say you like them both.
It is okay.
It's okay to say you don't like it either in the Facebook group. It's really okay.
That's true. All right. Well, before we go, we have some plugs. So, Trisha, what's going on with you?
Hyperspace Theories Mandalorian Season 3. If you haven't listened to that discussion, I feel like you could watch Disney Gallery and then say, oh, that BJ and Trisha must have watched Disney Gallery and then recorded that episode. But we pretty much nailed everything. Favreau called Din Aragorn, which I said, I said he was popcorn. There were all these different things. I'm like, yep. Saw all those things that they were doing. So again, I feel like I'm watching that discussion of their thing, and they're telling me a lot of technology, which is cool. But I would love to see that round table from the first gallery with all the directors sitting around a table talking about the process.
Yes.
And maybe it's a COVID thing that we're never going to see something like that again. But boy, I would really have loved. And they had to cobble together a story out of all the behind the scenes footage. It would just been really cool to put the directors in a room and let them talk together.
Yeah, definitely. Because they have to interact so much just to create the show. They have this interesting relationship, this special relationship.
It's still fun. Jack Black just doing his thing is worth it. And
Lizzo was fun too.
Lizzo with the baby. Yeah. And nobody calls him Grogu. Have you noticed that?
Baby Yoda, yes!
Like, it's the baby or the kid.
Okay.
It's never Grogu.
Only Ahsoka calls him Grogu.
Yeah.
I love it. All right. Well, recently, so, we love Star Trek. We love Star Wars. We love musicals. And so Rogers, the musical, is finally an reality at Avengers Campus in DCA. And I went opening day and the day after because I could not get enough of this 30-minute musical. And Trisha asked me to talk about this because she wants to know. So you can do special things, like you can do this like VIP experience where you can buy like this $29 ticket, which gets you basically as front row seats or as close to the front row as possible. Plus you get popcorn and a drink and a little lounge and all this fun stuff. So I got up super early to do that, and I was able to do it. I got in and it was very exciting. Otherwise you can just see it as part of your day. But so the musical, I saw it from the front row, and oh my God, it's so good. Like the casting they did for everyone is perfect. And what this is based on is this one song that we see in Hawkeye. The opening scene of Hawkeye is Hawkeye with his family, has brought his family to New York, and they're watching this Rogers the musical. And they're doing this song, Save the City, which is the Battle of New York. And it's so campy. It's so funny. So I was just expecting some campy songs. Disney had billed it as 5 new songs added to this Save the City song in a musical form. And it's at the Hyperion Theater, which is right next to Avengers Campus. So it's perfect. And so I was expecting to go in, enjoy, have fun. You guys, I cried. This
I like it.
30-minute set is Steve Rogers' story. Like, it's Captain America, the first Avenger. It goes through the Battle of New York. It goes through even Endgame. Like, do you care about any spoilers? No. Okay. So they have, Steve as scrawny Steve at first. He goes through his transformation. It's literally the whole story of Captain America. It's told by these Starkettes, which are 3 ladies who kind of sing and bring you along through the story. And then, eventually, so Steve goes through his transformation. He becomes, Steve Rogers, Captain America. They even do a recreation of the first 3 timely comics of Captain America by him walking into frame, and then it lights up and it's the comic book. It's so cool. It's like amazing. They have Peggy Carter. They have the scene where Steve is going into the ice and Peggy is on the line with him. Aww. And I cried. And then, then Steve wakes up and Nick Fury is there. And it's a musical Nick Fury who sings this amazing song to catch Steve up on what has happened in the last 80 years. And it's a patter song, right? It's hilarious. And he is hilarious. Like, the actor they chose for Nick Fury is fantastic. And he just eats up the audience. Like, he just chews the scenery. And then, then they eventually he introduces the Avengers. And so you get the Battle of New York. So you get the song. You all of a sudden the scenes change, and it's very well done. Like the lighting, the sets, everything. The set comes in and it's the exact set you see from Hawkeye, and it's the exact costumes that are from the Hawkeye musical, and it's a recreation completely of that song. And I was laughing my ass off, you guys. It was amazing. And and then after that, you know, it kind of cycles through, and all of a sudden Steve, you know, he's saving the city, not just New York, but then he saves a different city and another city and Wakanda and the Age of Ultron city, whatever that's called. Yeah, it's not Slovakia, but the one that starts with an S, and all that. And then finally, you know, like there's this big crescendo, and then it stops, and all of a sudden wheeled on stage is a bench with old Captain America.
Aww.
And old Captain America and Steve Rogers sing this amazing duet that makes you cry again. And so then, you know, you get the whole Endgame story where Steve gets to go back in time and sees Peggy, who has been saving the date.
We don't really get to see it all. We just, they just show us that they're together.
Yeah. So we get to see that. They sing a song, a duet. Oh my God. It's like so amazing. And then they do a reprise of Save the City, kind of mixed with some of the other songs. And they've gotten a standing ovation every time I've seen it, which has been 3 times. So
cool.
It's awesome.
Cool. Well, I'm going to have a chance.
Yes.
We're going to San Diego Comic-Con, but I'm going to stop at Disneyland on the way.
Yeah. And it's fairly easy to get in because it is a niche. Not everyone who's going to DCA is going to want to see a musical. So you have a very good chance of getting
It's a huge theater.
It's a huge theater. You can even wait and stand by. Like, you don't have to get virtual queue. You'll be fine. You'll be fine. Yeah. So I'm excited. But speaking of San Diego Comic-Con, like you said, Trisha, we will both be there. Richard will also be there too, and BJ. And we're all going to be at Comic-Con for at least Friday and Saturday for me, possibly Thursday. And also, Skywalking Through Neverland, we were accepted for a panel. It's going to be a really fun panel on Friday. It's a Star Wars trivia extravaganza of fun. It's at 8 p.m. in room 7AB. So it's after like the whole main day. You can just have fun, chill out. We're going to divide the room into 2 different teams, and you guys have the opportunity to win prizes and just have fun. It'll be great.
Oh, no pressure. Star Wars trivia.
Yeah, exactly. But it's fun trivia. If you've ever done trivia games with Skywalking Through Neverland, you know that it's more fun than it is like a huge, big challenge, you know, that kind of a thing. So.
I like this when you're like at the trivia and you're like, oh, that's way too much for my brain.
Yeah,
so
no,
that'd be good.
It's not that kind of trivia. Yeah. But it's in
awesome.
room 7AB at 8 p.m. on Friday.
And if you guys haven't listened to our Fangirls Going Rogue Galactic Star Cruiser discussion, go check that out. That was our last episode. Meredith Duckworth joined us. We talked about, she went on the voyage since it's been announced it's closing. And we talked about the things we loved about Star Cruisers, the potential reasons why it ended up not succeeding. And apparently since then, Josh D'Amaro has hinted that some parts of the experience will be realized, reimagined maybe. So I'm hoping maybe they'll take like maybe the bridge training, Jedi Training Academy, maybe the dinner theater, which we talked about in that podcast episode, and put them back to use, because there's a lot of things I think people would love to see in pieces. We talked about the financial cost of doing the whole experience, but I think they could take chunks of it and still make it fun.
I agree. Yeah.
And as always, we have our Zoom chats. I'll be doing one tonight. So the next one after this episode will be July 17th. Secret Invasion will be up. At that point, it'll be the penultimate episode, which is typically the best episode of a Marvel show.
Yep.
And we'll be halfway through Strange New Worlds. So
yay.
With that, we're going to wrap up.
That's right. So visit us over at fangirlsgoingrogue.com. You can also find us on social media. We are at FG Going Rogue. I am at Jedi Tink, and Trisha is at Fangirl Cantina.
You can email us, contact@fangirlsgoingrogue.com.
And you can also find us on Facebook. So search Facebook for Fangirls Going Rogue and like the page and join the group.
And please go to Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts and leave a positive 5-star review. We need your reviews so more people can find us.
So until next time, live long and prosper and da-da-da-da-da, yub.
Yub.
This site is not affiliated in any way with Lucasfilm Limited, LLC, the Walt Disney Company, or any of their affiliates or subsidiaries.